Hey guys, welcome back to the Casual NBA Fanatic podcast. With the new season right around the corner, I think it's time to lock in my top 5 contenders for the 2025-2026 NBA season. So today's episode is just going to be more quick hitting here. I'll be running through each team and breaking them down on 5 marks. We're going to be going through a quick overview of where they stand heading into the season, each team's biggest strength and weakness, and each team's one X-factor player who could swing their title hopes, and their biggest question mark for each team to answer that might hold them back from the ultimate goal. We've got a ton to get through, so let's quickly dive right into it, starting with number 1, the Oklahoma City Thunder. Now, with OKC, obviously they are the reigning champs, and I truly have reigning champ bias, so that's why I do have them repeating as champions again. But over the past few years, the actual chances of repeating in today's NBA are extremely low. But with OKC, the actual chances of them actually upholding their overall advantage across the league does give them the best chance to repeat out of any champion since the 2018 Warriors. And just to go through their starting unit, it seems relatively the same. SGA, Lou Dort, Jalen Williams, Chet Holmgren, Isaiah Hartenstein, that rounds out their starting unit. And then their bench unit remains also pretty much the same. You got Alex Caruso, Cason Wallace, Aaron Wiggins, Isaiah Joe, Jalen Williams, and then you'll see possible minutes going to AJ Mitchell and Nikola Topic. But the story for OKC revolves around their roster consistency and the natural progression throughout their roster. Strength-wise, OKC might have the most dominant superior trait, and it's a trait that is truly undeniable, and it's their all-time constructed defense. And that gives them such an advantageous strength that no one can rival and has the ability to actually back a championship-level team alone. We're talking about a GOAT-level point of attack line. Lou Dort, Alex Caruso, Cason Wallace, Jalen Williams, plus the elite complementary defensive role guys like your SGAs, like your Aaron Wigginses. This is like a complete defensive unit that thrives through screen navigation, pristine, cohesive communication, elite hand activity both on and off the ball, passing lane disruption as well, transition leakages perfectly timed, exceptional lateral speed to throw doubles and stunts to the post and on drives, and being able to recover out with discipline and perfected perimeter rotations to the highest level for 48 minutes straight. That is the type of elite perimeter value that they're getting from their defense each single night. Then their interior defensive units, they have a near perfected 3-man frontline rotation for the regular season. We saw it fairly regularly exhibited throughout the playoffs too. So they have their main Chet and Hartenstein unit. So you're pairing basically your physical absorber with a ton of mobility in Hartenstein with your elite modern day rim contester in Chet Holmgren, the most disciplined rim protector that we have in basketball. Then they also throw out Chet units at the 5 where you actually can have Jalen Williams or Alex Caruso, sometimes possibly like a Lou Dort, providing that physical resistance next to Chet where he can also swat those drives on the back line. That unit has elite switchability, and that stalled out most famously that Pacers squad in the finals. But then you also have those J. Will and Chet units as well. Again, physical absorption from Jalen Williams, giving Isaiah Hartenstein that break, and then you get the roaming minutes from Chet Holmgren once again. It's just perfected, and overall, it's a perfected mix of personnel and cohesive chemistry, plus the elite motors that you're getting across in that personnel. And really, if OKC want to assert their dominant presence once again, it'll be because of how exceptional this defense is. Weakness-wise for OKC, offensively. I mean, the real question is if anyone outside of SGA can provide that real playoff-level offensive initiation spurt with consistency. Obviously, last year in the playoffs, J-Dub was relatively inconsistent at continually generating rim pressure in spurts, and we only really saw him exhibit that in the Western Conference Finals and in the Finals, but those first 2 rounds were a struggle. And we've seen J-Dub relatively inconsistent at continually making these physically created spoon-fed reads. And then also, it's just Chet Holmgren. I mean, the lack of strength, the inconsistent off-the-dribble shooting, and then the sometimes varying tunnel vision. That stuff does find OKC with some inconsistent juice from their secondary ball handler spot come playoff time. But also, you don't want to be fully reliant on SGA, especially once again in the playoffs. We saw the heroics from SGA throughout the entire postseason to lead that title. You can't just lead on him to bail you guys out with that all-time shot-making piece. Someone else has to step up from the get-go, especially starting in this regular season, especially if you do want to coast through and take another 1-seed leap again. OKC's X-Factor, it's really what we do get from J-Dub and Chet, kind of leeching off to what we were talking about before, in the natural progression piece. Obviously, J-Dub, the work that he needs to put into is more the pull-up polish, which he hopefully can get back to from a few years ago. Just the real rim pressure exertion as well, just focusing on that as a superior athlete. More fluid, creating dribble penetration as well, not just relying on just the pure raw strength and power advantage, but also utilizing the agility as well that he can throw. For Chet, it's more about the strength, the fastening up those jumper mechanics, maximizing the agile frame on those perimeter drives against those more slow-footed centers, and then obviously just sharpening the jump shot polish in general, which did vary throughout both postseasons that we've seen with Chet. And for OKC, it's really just these guys will be the real deciding factor of just how well OKC can actually maintain their place as the league's best team in the NBA. For OKC, their biggest question mark for me remains to be their offensive execution again. These are all offensive related as far as the weaknesses and the questionable marks for them. Yes, they were a top 3 offense throughout the regular season, but we saw in the playoffs OKC consistently struggling in their offensive execution piece in the half court. We saw multiple shooting droughts, just the inexperienced initiation, especially against those zone sets, and just the lack of assertive creation outside of SGA. Obviously, off-ball movement as well has never really been huge for OKC, especially, and even towards the ends of games, it really became the equation of relying on their defense for enough stops, and then just hoping SGA could isolate and create enough quality offense to sustain their scoring. But now looking on to next season with more powerful offenses around them, like what Denver's done in their changes, bringing in a guy like Cam Johnson and Tim Hardaway Jr. and Jonas Valanciunas, I just think OKC need to become much sharper and stronger executing in the half court surgically, just varying up their late game offensive sets to provide more of those external avenues for offense in those tight-knit situations so it doesn't fall into this pure pace stalling and tough shot making flow. And that will really be a huge factor for OKC if they can really continue to assert themselves as the league's best team. Now moving up to our second team, we have the Denver Nuggets. And Denver, for me, they land just a close hair behind OKC as my second best contender heading into the 2026 NBA season. And really just for the overview for Denver, it's the fact that they have the best player in the world with the best offensive system. And last year, prior to the changes, they took the best team in the league to 7 games, despite what was a pretty desperate playoff campaign, considering just how bad they were looking prior to the playoffs amidst the Mike Malone firing. So their unit going into next season, it looks extremely strong on paper, but also just the cohesive way that their system's going to run. Jamal Murray, Christian Brown, Cam Johnson, Aaron Gordon, and Nikola Jokic. And their bench depth increase as well of Bruce Brown, Jonas Valanciunas, Peyton Watson, Tim Hardaway Jr., and Julian Strawther. We might see possible minutes also floating to Deron Holmes or Jalen Pickett as well. But this whole unit and roster just looks exceptionally constructed as of now. Strength-wise, opposite of OKC, Denver's biggest strength is their all-time level efficient half-court offense. And it's based around 2 main actions, and these 2 main actions are the ones that generate consistently reliable, high-efficient looks, and it's the Jamal Jokic 2-man game, and it's the Jokic post-up/elbow touches. Now with Denver, similar to the way Golden State have initiated their all-time pristine offense over the years, they actually have the luxury of the fact that every single action, every sense of movement on the floor typically involves their megastar. And obviously we know how damaging Steph has been historically on and off the ball. But as of right now, Jokic presents similar value in that regard. And in every single Denver offensive action, to actually have his gravity, his shot touch profile, his presence, that just enables Denver to churn pure quality offense every time down the floor. Obviously, with Jokic at this point in time, you bring elite screening value. You got the extreme off-ball presence that he is as a post-up threatening fulcrum. You have the brutal deep post positioning anchor, being able to fight for positioning down low, the value that brings when you're trying to destroy defenses. The all-time offensive glass creation as well, the extraordinary value catching every single place on the floor, top of the key, on the elbows, in the low post. And so with Jokic, it's far from just the on-ball GOAT post-up value sort of things. But outside of Jokic, it's also just the spot-up execution throughout the starting unit, which is just going to make this team so easily able to churn out quality offense. And that spot-up value includes Jokic, obviously. And this is just a pristine offense that masters the quality blend between physicality, IQ, skill, and shot diversity. Obviously, their main weakness is still their defensive personnel between the tip and base of their defense. And when reviewing their playoff ceiling, Denver do have 2 guys who can be hunted in mismatches and in ball screens pretty comfortably. And that is obviously between Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic. but the offense will give them enough room for error, hopefully for their defense to at least make them viable championship contenders without hesitation. And the thing is, with these weaknesses of having these two guys that can be mismatch hunted against, it's the fact that these are guys that also can stick to a cohesive team-oriented defensive game plan. The only thing is, it's just the two guys. These are guys that can't substantially be tasked with high-level defensive roles, but also guys that don't contribute to a high-tier playoff defense purely because of their ages and the offensive workload and the athletic limitations that come with Jokic and Murray. So I'm not going to harp on it too much, but that is the biggest weakness for Denver heading into next season, as it was for the past few years. Now, the biggest X factor for me is going to be Christian Braun. Really just the growth towards being a dominant defensive wing, and then if we can see some more spot-up improvements, especially in the offseason, what has he been working on as far as the offensive off-ball game? In the playoffs, he's shot just 30% from three and ranked in the 16th percentile for spot-up efficiency at 0.77 points per possession on over 4 possessions a game. So that'll be a big question mark, is what growth and natural progression we're going to see from him. And the biggest question mark is just how good Jamal Murray is going to be. So are we really going to finally get this all-star level Jamal Murray, that 2023 playoff version of Jamal again? Or is he athletically just not the same as what he used to be? We saw like every star, like what we saw against OKC, but just how much Jamal can struggle against pesky point of attack defenses and how much these teams can handle his physical frame and the pick and roll creation and test him as a general advantage creating ball handler, where his passing has never been a huge component. But with Denver, a huge chunk of their chances of hoisting the trophy again just rely so heavily on Jamal Murray being that stamped top 25 version of himself that we saw a few years back. But besides that, Denver land here as my second favorite to hoist the trophy after what has been an exceptional offseason of just pure roster construction. Now, number 3, I have the Cleveland Cavaliers, who rank here as my clear favorite out east. Just a team who last year was the number 1 regular season offense and boasted 3 All-Stars, 2 All-NBA guys, Defensive Player of the Year, and the Coach of the Year. But building upon last year's success will be the challenge for Cleveland. Obviously, their loss to Indiana in the semifinals was a very disappointing bout. They also had the injury concerns as well around Garland and Mobley, the reliable external creators. Those are all the big issues that did plague them towards the end of last season. But looking onto their projected unit for this season, again, like the other teams, it is pretty much the same in terms of the core foundation. Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, DeAndre Hunter, Evan Mobley, and Jarrett Allen will be the projected starters. Then you have the bench unit of Max Strus, Lonzo Ball, Sam Merrill, Dean Wade, Larry Nance Jr., and Thomas Bryant. So for the strengths, it purely lies once again in their offensive creation and their regular season pick and roll formula. And it's really just they have 2 of some of the highest quality creators in the NBA between a healthy Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell. Last year, Cleveland were the league's best pick and roll offense and the best transition offense. And so basically that formula for basic full and half court offense is pretty clear for them. And that's why I think the regular season will be a coast once again if they can stay healthy. And just their steady dose of mismatch hunting, just the switch beating, the ball movement as well, that is what enables them to generate continuous quality, along also with the lineup consistency that they can throw out there to uphold their offensive quality. That comes with their super skilled frontline that they can throw out from guys like Evan Mobley to Jarrett Allen, Dean Wade. Larry Nance is a relatively polished ball handling big man. And then you also bring in a guy like Thomas Bryant, offensive charged role playing big. And so just their blend of elite shot creators and high level play finishing role players and bigs as well. That is what gives Cleveland their offensive stability, especially for the 82-game regular season. Their weaknesses, though, lie with their defensive backcourt, which actually doesn't seem like as big of an issue as what it did last year. And really, that was why Cleveland still stand as a top-tier contender in the league. They have filled that hole relatively well. Last year, despite a holistic and committed team-wide defensive structure, the ease at which teams could hunt, particularly Darius Garland, Ty Jerome, and Sam Merrill, that was just a major mitigator in their defensive stability and why they couldn't touch a top 5 defensive rank last year, despite winning 64 regular season games. And that really came from the lack of pure physical denial from those 3, a lack of physical pestering and disruptive hands overall that just mitigated any value that they could have brought defensively. And that gave the front line of Evan Mobley and Jared Allen, especially Evan Mobley, too much to make up for as far as, on those help and recover situations, especially for a double big front line, which naturally doesn't have the same level of foot speed and space coverage as a lot of other teams in the modern NBA. Obviously, though, this weakness, it's still pretty prevalent, but it isn't as prevalent as it was last season. And that really comes with the swap out between Ty Jerome for Lonzo Ball. And with Lonzo, we've seen in the preseason already, you bring in a high-level defensive athlete with a strong frame, elite instincts, and great lateral tracking. The only thing with Lonzo, though, and what does feed into this still being a prevalent weakness, is that we can only really project Lonzo to play probably a ceiling of 55 games this season. And with only short on-court spurts as well, game to game, it still just leaves a massive hole in their defensive structure, just that point of attack line. And obviously having an overall high-level defensive front line and mistake erasing help, that does mitigate this, the problem that this creates. But having Garland and Sam Merrill still on the roster, and even Donovan Mitchell to a degree, that will still hold them back when it comes to containing truly high-level, three-level scoring guards and just containing the ball in general, as it did last year. Moving on for their X factor, just mentioned before, I think it's Lonzo Ball and just how valuable his key role player traits will be for this Cleveland team, who despite having great impact from Ty Jerome last year, they just didn't have a backup guard who could give them the complementary skills that Lonzo does have with the elite defensive ceiling, the connective transition passing traits, the overall strong athletic frame, and just the frame of a guy who can theoretically play with both Mitchell and Garland at the same time, which Jerome just couldn't with the athletic limitations there. That was just a huge signing for Cleveland, who will no doubt get great benefits from that subtle addition of Lonzo Ball, but definitely a huge X factor of how much he can actually play for them. And then their biggest question mark for me is the injury concern around Darius Garland. Honestly, for me, that was the factor that derailed their finals aspirations, and missing that primary elite advantage creating guy, just a guy whose full lack of burst in that Pacers series was fully extracted, that just took out such a bulk of their offensive quality. And over the years as well, with Garland, he's been fully plagued with injuries in general. And so a big question mark for them still remains to be if they can truly get a fully healthy version of that top 10 offensive player that Darius Garland can be come playoff time. That will be a huge piece for Cleveland if they do want to assert themselves as a top 3 contender once again. Now, moving on to my fourth contender for this list, it is the Houston Rockets, and this is a team with an elite defense, elite athleticism, and an elite high-intensity squad who last year milked the margins absolutely incredibly on the glass, just forcing turnovers, physically disrupting teams' offensive initiation with their elite point-of-attack athletes and their physical front line. And with the exceptional notable additions that they've made, including Kevin Durant, Dorian Finney-Smith, Clint Capella, Josh Okogie, it seems as if they're fully leaning into this physical identity, but have also addressed by far their biggest weakness, which was their spacing value amongst the roster. And it is why we can now view this team as a top-tier championship contender heading into next season. Now for Houston, their biggest strength, as briefly touched on, is their pure and raw size and how they use it. Rebounding prowess. They were the league leader in rebounds, field goal attempts, and were a top 5 defense in the league last season. And just that size with the projected unit of Reed, Amen Thompson, Jabari Smith, KD, Şengün, with a stacked physical bench of Okogie, Aaron Holiday, Tari Eason, Steven Adams, Clint Capella, Dorian Finney-Smith, the Rockets just have filled their roster with an elite combination of size and strength metrics with rangy athletes who can cover space and cover passing and shot release windows at such an elite level. And that just gives them more margin for error with how they can derail pull-up shooting and force hesitant half-court ball movement. Their weakness, on the other hand, though, probably isn't too much the spacing piece anymore, especially with Reed in that starting unit now, an elite shooter off the catch, off movement, and a high-quality pull-up scoring prospect who has completely bowled out in the preseason. But also you bring in a guy like KD, and the all-time on and off-ball scoring value type of player. Dorian Finney-Smith comes in, a big-time addition too, and these are guys that can provide lengthy spacing with their over-the-top release advantages. But the Rockets now, they have a bigger weakness within their ball handling department, especially with Fred VanVleet's injury. That does rule them out for the whole of the upcoming season. But without VanVleet and needing to fully rely on a year 2 Reed Shepherd stepping into a top 2 ball handling role it just presents too many variables for their offensive stability against high ball pressure squads like Minnesota and OKC. And this will be a huge factor in their inability to create easing offensive flow through their post-entry type of offense and their comfortability attacking closeouts and extending offensive advantages with guys who just aren't the most developed ball handlers just yet. We're looking at guys like Jabari Smith and Amen and even KD. These are guys who aren't high-level ball handlers against real physicality just yet. And so though I heavily believe in Reed Sheppard and what he can do, I think he's a relatively polished role player already. It'll be interesting just how much Houston have addressed this plaguing weakness without their primary table setter in Fred VanVleet. Now moving on to their X factor, like we've just already spoken about a little bit, it is Reed Sheppard without a doubt. And with how well he's been in the preseason, it'll be interesting just to see how well he can slot into that lead guard role for Houston, who will desperately need his shooting, his gravity, his presence, his contained handle, and the general table setting features that he brings to the game. And in terms of the question marks, for Houston, it'll mainly be just how good their offensive core foundation can be in a high-stake, playoff-intense environment, and if their three-man core between KD, Şengün, and Amen Thompson can create enough advantages like proven offenses like OKC and Denver have proven to be able to do throughout the playoffs. Obviously, KD is still amazing, but he may not have the same overall 1A value as he once did, and maybe not enough to back a championship level roster anymore. And obviously with Şengün and Amen still being pretty raw as prospects, seeing just how well they can create valuable offense throughout a playoff series. Obviously we're looking at Şengün's perspective, leaning more into that post-up scoring improvement field, and for Amen more just the overall ball handling value with possible improvements as an intermediate scorer and more of that dominant on-ball dribble penetration using those absurd athletic capabilities. But those are the big question marks for Houston. But I do think they'll be a top 3 seed in the West, and I do believe they are a top 5 team to compete for the title this upcoming season. Now, moving on to my 5th spot, my 5th top contender is Minnesota. And the reason why I have them here is purely because of the success that they've seen in back-to-back years despite major structural changes. And this is a top dog, highly physical squad who didn't quite check the aggression and motor box like what Houston did last year, but this is definitely a team that filled more in that skill-based category. Now, obviously, with Houston's changes, that skill gap has narrowed, and that's why I do have Houston above Minnesota. But for Minnesota's case, just they still have that same formula that Houston have delved into, and that is what will make them a championship contender once again. Their current unit stands as Mike Conley, Anthony Edwards, Jade McDaniels, Julius Randle, and Rudy Gobert. And their bench unit is still super strong and deep despite losing Nickeil Alexander-Walker. And so you have Dante DiVincenzo, you have Naz Reid, you have Terrence Shannon Jr., you have Jalen Clark, and Rob Dillingham. And just their biggest and most distinctive strength to me is actually going to be their frontline depth. Just that 3-man rotation unit between Randle, Gobert, and Naz Reid. For me, it's just so perfected and so well constructed and an extremely underrated piece to what has made them so great for 2 years in a row now. Minnesota have successfully filled out their front line for all 48 minutes with just high-level impact across the board and really just something that never dips in fit or really any department. And it's a huge reason why I love this roster fit so much, especially when you are getting the Julius Randle that we did see last season. Now, that starting unit, so obviously in the front line, you have Julius Randle and Rudy Gobert. That allows you to have an elite top 5 defensive anchor and captain on the floor, whilst also having an elite shot creating and ball handling forward like Randle, who can make up for that ball handling gap on the perimeter. You also have Naz Reid, who can suit up and fill in Randle's spot, providing substantially more spacing value and just much more efficient play finishing, who also gives you your best defensive lineup when he is seated next to Rudy Gobert, just with the switchability and the high level lateral athleticism that he can offer. And then when you want to delve into pure offense, that Randle and Reid fit is absolutely superb, with Reid being able to be this perfect off-ball offensive center for the modern day NBA. And so though not really focused on, this was my favorite aspect for this Wolves roster over the past 2 seasons and why I do believe in this roster construction so greatly. And obviously moving on to weaknesses now, it's their general playmaking across the roster and that passing department. That is their biggest weakness heading into this season, as it was last year too. Now with the passing, it's two-pronged. You need to have players that have enough gravity on ball to be able to create quality passing windows with their scoring value, but you also need to be an extremely reactive and fast processing mind to be able to take advantage of those reads that open up. And typically, more explosive athletes do generally have more trouble with making those reads consistently, and that has been Ant's biggest issue as a playmaker. But then Randall too as well. Like, Randall's a player that can struggle with tunnel vision quite frequently. Gobert as well, he's got next to no hand-eye coordination. Jaden McDaniels still is yet to consistently provide initiation reps with his lack of strength and lack of pull-up gravity still. Conley is a good connective table-setting passer, but he's not someone that can create advantages anymore to what he used to. And so just the absence of a high-level passer has led to sometimes what can be super stagnant, ISO-heavy playoff offense. And compared to the teams above them and surrounding them, this is by far their biggest flaw at the moment. Obviously, for their X factor, for Minnesota, it's going to be Rob Dillingham for me. And really for Rob, it's if he can actually step into a real bench role now in year 2. For Rob, he's legitimately a good pull-up shooting prospect with great athleticism, amazing shiftiness, and excellent elevation tools. But he has yet been able to actually commit to this high intensity and disruptive defensive identity that the rest of the roster aims to exhibit. And therefore, he was relatively unplayable for their defensive structure last season. But if he can fix some of those holes and actually work to a playable level next to Rudy Gobert and Jaden McDaniels and their defensive strengths, he will be a major X factor for their upcoming season. And then as far as question marks go, Minnesota's point guard position, and that will be my biggest question for them. Currently, it projects to be Mark Conley who's going to be starting for them. But with the age concerns and the full lack of any driving value, just with the drop in athleticism and overall shot confidence at the rim on those floaters, Conley's value is absolutely diminishing quite rapidly, and moving towards Dante DiVincenzo may be the move to fully boost their chances of having stabilized offensive firepower, bringing in a much more athletic advantage extender and play finisher, someone with much more spot-up attacking gravity. But obviously without Conley as well, you're going to be losing the most mature presence in that locker room on the starting unit, someone who can mimic much of Dante's spacing value. But that sacrifice, obviously for Minnesota, that might be more justifiable if Conley loses even more athleticism than he already has. But overall for Minnesota, for what they've achieved in the past 2 years, I'm going to give them their credit where it's due and place them as a top 5 contender heading into this stacked 2026 NBA season. And now with Minnesota, that does wrap up my top 5 contenders heading into next year. OKC, Denver, Cleveland, Houston, and the Timberwolves. Each of these teams bring something completely different to the table, and from proven experience like what the Nuggets have, to OKC's youthful reigning dominance over the league, to Cleveland and Minnesota's proven formulas, and Houston's rise as a legitimate force in the West. But looking into next year, there's no clear runaway favorite, and this makes this season even more unpredictable. And no matter how it plays out, all 5 of these squads I've listed here, they just have the talent, the depth, and the structure to actually make a real run at the finals. And it's going to come down to really just who stays healthy and who clicks at the right time and who handles the pressure the best when it matters most. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll have more breakdowns leading up to tip-off. So make sure you follow the podcast at Casual NBA Fanatic on Instagram for all the latest analysis, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.